Hello, everyone. Sorry for the delay. We were having a bit of technical difficulties, but we are back in action, and we're so happy that you are joining us for our afternoon programming. We are going to be doing an aquarium exploration, and we are going to be exploring food webs. Now, as you can see already on the screen, my name is Sarah. I work in the education department at the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California, and we would love your participation. So as you can see, there's a phone number right here on the screen. And if you have any questions during this program about things you see, about animals, if you want to know more about a subject we're talking about, feel free to text us at 562-286-1838. Now keep in mind that data and text rates do apply. And if you're one of our younger viewers, make sure you have adult permission before you text in. But send us your observations, your questions, things you're wondering. We love to hear from you. Now, if you are watching this program after we're live, so it's not Tuesday, July 7th at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we still want to hear from you if you have questions, but we have an email address that you can send your questions to, and that email address is right below the phone number. It's live@lbaop.org. So if you're watching live, text us, and if it's after the program, send us your questions in that email. All right, we are going to get started. So we are going to be exploring food webs. Now, before we get into the meat of a food web, of who is involved in a food web, I want to talk a little bit about the difference between a food web and a food chain, because they're pretty similar. For both of them, we're basically following the flow of energy, right? So a food web and a food chain involve animals and what eats what, as we kind of look in a habitat or an ecosystem, but it's really following that flow of energy. Now, I drew out some basic food chains and food webs. Now, bear with me, I'm not the best artist, but we're going to go over to my document camera and look at those drawings before we explore an actual habitat. So, we're going to take a look at this picture right here. So this is a food chain. Now, it's a pretty basic food chain. Now, what I've drawn here is we started with kelp. So this is an algae. It's similar to a plant. And kelp, it uses the sun for energy. So it takes the sunlight, it produces its energy, and that helps it grow. So that is the bottom, or the basis of this food chain. And then next comes, this is my drawing of a sea urchin. So the sea urchin comes next in the food chain because the sea urchin's main food source is the kelp. Now, they mainly eat this bottom part. It's called the holdfast. But they eat kelp almost exclusively, and that's where they get their energy. So the kelp is getting energy from the sun, it's into the kelp, and then it flows as we move through our chain to our sea urchin. Now, there's a couple different things that eat sea urchins, but in this food chain, we're going to focus on a fish. Now, specifically, we'll talk about later a particular fish that eats sea urchins, but here it's just a general fish. So the fish feeds on sea urchins, the sea urchin feeds on kelp, and the kelp uses the sun for energy. So that's a chain. And what makes this a food chain is it's one line. We're just following the flow of energy from one to the next, So just a straight line. Now I'm going to head back over to my document camera, and I'm going to switch it out for a different drawing. You get to see more of my masterful drawings here. And this is our food web. Now this one looks a little bit more chaotic, a little bit more confusing, but it shows the flow of energy. It's not linear, right? It's not one animal eats another animal eats another animal. There's actually all these different areas or ways that the energy flows. So again, we started with that kelp, and then we have the sea urchin who eats the kelp for energy. But look next, who eats the sea urchin? So if we follow these arrows backwards, you'll see that there's a fish right here that eats the sea urchin, just like in the food chain. However, we've got some other animals that eat the sea urchin as well, like all the way up here, my excellent drawing of birds. Birds might feed on sea urchins, and humans might eat sea urchins. So rather than just one animal, the fish, eating a sea urchin, there's 3 different things that might eat the sea urchin. And then we've got this animal right here, a sea snail. Now the sea snail isn't eating the sea urchins, but like the urchins, it's also eating the kelp. And then there's going to be animals who eat the snails, like the fish, who might also eat sea urchins, or a sea star, who might also eat other animals, or even now a squid. So the squid might eat the snail that eats the kelp. And then we've got an arrow right here, because the birds might eat the squid that eats the snail that eats the kelp. And then even people are going to be eating things like fish and squid. So a food web is a little bit more complicated, a little more complex, because there's not just one linear flow of energy. The energy moves in different directions. There are multiple animals who eat other things. And so we're going to explore a food web. Now we're going to explore this food web by looking at one of our exhibits here at the aquarium. Now I'm not alone in the studio. I have Cynthia who's going to be changing the screens behind us, and Dana is going to be taking all the questions and observations you send in. So I'm going to have Cynthia bring up our blue cavern exhibit. So that's an exhibit here at the aquarium. This is our second largest exhibit, and it's modeled after a kelp forest habitat. So we're going to stick with that theme of kelp. And this is actually modeled after a real dive site off the island of Catalina, which is about 23 miles from us here in Long Beach. So I'm going to step off the screen, but what I want you to do, my kind of question or challenge for you, is to take a look at the animals you see here and see if you can figure out any relationships between the animals here, if there's a food chain or a food web that maybe exists with what animals you find in this habitat. So go ahead and take a look. What do you see? We've got some different fish I see. We've also got that plant-looking stuff, that kelp. So that might be involved. And it looks like there's actually different types of kelp in there, or different types of algae. There's different types of fish. There are also different sizes. Maybe that plays a part in it. All right. So I hope you made some observations. Maybe you thought them to yourself, or you shared them with someone who you're watching with, or someone around you. You can even send us your observations and let us know the things that you're thinking. Now, if we start with all the plants in here. So like I said, this is modeled after a kelp forest habitat. And kelp is that algae that's growing. So this stuff all here, that is the kelp. Now, this bright green stuff right here, that's not kelp, but it's another type of algae commonly found in this type of habitat. And so all these algae, they are going to be using the sun for energy. Our kelp will grow towards the surface trying to get more sunlight for more energy. And they're going to be what we call the base of our food web or our food chain, because they're at the bottom. I guess the sun would be the base, but we're going to start with our kelp. It's sort of at the bottom, and everything is going to come from that. Now, we don't have them specifically in this habitat, but what you would commonly find in a habitat like this are those sea urchins. So let's see if we can bring up, perfect, right on cue, a picture of a sea urchin. Have you seen a sea urchin before? They're really interesting animals. It really just looks like a ball covered in spikes. And they really are this color, this bright purple. Now, sea urchins do come in colors. Here along the coast, we also have red sea urchins, which get a little bit bigger. Their spines are a little bit longer. We also have green sea urchins. And we even have some sea urchins that are white. But there's also black sea urchins, and sea urchins can be found all over in all different types of waters. But here, one of the most common ones we have are these purple urchins. And you notice this purple urchin is sitting on a blade of kelp because, as I mentioned before, that is their main food source. Now, sea urchins, as I said, they kind of look like a spiky, round ball. Where do you think their mouth is? Does it look like they even have a mouth? So they're actually sitting on their food and sort of sitting on their mouth too. If we were to turn the sea urchin over and look at the bottom, that is where their mouth is. Now, sea urchins are part of a group of animals called echinoderms. That's a big word. We can all say that together, echinoderms. And what an echinoderm is, or what that word means, is it's spiny skinned, which is a pretty good name for an animal that looks like this. But something that echinoderms also share is they have what we call radial symmetry. So they're a circle, and they're usually split into about 5 parts. And if we were to look at the mouth of a sea urchin, they have 5 teeth, kind of in a circle. Looks like this. They're teeny little white teeth, and it's called an Aristotle's lantern. So that's the word that we use to describe with their mouth. But those 5 teeth are great for munching through kelp. Sometimes on the beach you might see kelp washed up, and it's got these kind of curly edges, sort of like half circles taken out, and those are bite marks from the teeth of a sea urchin. And sea urchins are really good at just mowing down kelp forests. They mainly eat that holdfast, but they'll really eat any part of it that they can get. And that is where they get their energy from, is from eating kelp. So we talked about the kelp gets energy from the sun. And then the sea urchins get energy from the kelp. We have a question coming in, so I'm going to get to that in just a second. So I want you to think about, we talked about this food web, this food chain. So the sun gives energy to the kelp gives energy to the sea urchin. What does the sea urchin Who does the sea urchin provide energy for? So what animals might we find in a kelp forest that give energy, or get energy from the sea urchin? So think about that, and I'm going to go to this question. So the question is, do squids end up eating kelp since they eat the urchin that eats it? Ooh, that is a great question. That's a good way to put it. So you think about an animal in a food chain or food web. Are they technically eating everything that their food ate? Pretty much. That's sort of how it works. It's not directly, right? We would never really say that a squid is eating kelp because it ate something that ate kelp. But they're getting nutrients passed on from those things. So a squid eating another animal who ate kelp and got nutrients from that kelp, those nutrients help that animal and then give them on to the squid. So they're not technically eating kelp per se, but they are getting nutrients and vitamins that are passed on from those animals through that food web. So here is a nice picture of a kelp forest. So think about what animals might be eating those sea urchins. Now, we have a couple of them here at the aquarium, and one of them is commonly found right here along our coast in the kelp forest, and it's a fish like I drew in that chain. So we're going to bring up a photo of a fish called a sheephead, a California sheephead, just like this. So this is a California sheephead, and this one is a male California sheephead. And in a second, I'll tell you how I know it's a male. But what I want to point out is their mouth. Now you can kind of see they've got this white jaw, but right up there, you can kind of see sticking out of their mouth is a big tooth. So sheephead are known for having these really big teeth because what they feed on are sea urchins. So when the sun gives energy to the kelp is eaten by urchins, and then urchins are eaten by fish like our sheephead. Now, I said that I can tell this is a male because sheepheads are a really interesting fish. All sheepheads are actually born female, and they don't really look like this. Their full body is more of this rosy color, their whole entire body, and their body's a little bit more streamlined, sort of more of that oval or kind of football shaped. And then there's one male who's in charge of all the females. And when that male dies, the most dominant female then transitions into a male. And when she transitions, her tail and her head become a darker red, sometimes even a black color. And her head itself kind of looks more of a kind of square head. We have them here in our blue cavern. So if you pull up our webcam at any point, you might see our sheepheads, our male sheephead, and you can tell it's a male because it's got this stripe going down its body. So the sheephead eats the urchins, which eats the kelp, which uses sun. Now, do you think there's anything that eats sea urchin or that eats the sheephead? If you said yes, you're probably right. Any larger fish that is found in this area is likely to feed on an animal like a sheephead. So that might be our linear chain. But if we look at any branches, like I said, sheephead are not the only animal who feed on sea urchins. Now we have one that looks nice and cute and cuddly here at the aquarium. And I'm going to have Cynthia bring up a picture of a sea otter. Excellent. So this right here is a sea otter, and this is another animal that is known for eating sea urchins. Now, sometimes sea otters are known to eat so many sea urchins that we find that their teeth turn purple and even their bones turn purple from eating so many of those purple sea urchins. But they are another animal who benefits from the sea urchins, who benefit from the kelp, who benefit from the sun. So they are part of that food web because they're another branch of something that eats the sea urchins. Now, sea otters, they have a range of foods that they like to eat. There's about, I think, 20 things that they might eat. But sea otters choose a couple, like 2 or 3 that are their favorites. And right here you can see this otter is not eating urchin. It's eating, I think, a piece of clam. Now, sea otters, they need to eat a lot. So sea otters are found in Northern California. So we don't find them so much here in Southern California. Here's a sea otter eating. Give you a minute to watch that because it's pretty cute. Just chowing down, using their belly as a little plate. How nice would that be if we could just lie on our backs and use our belly as a plate to eat our food? So sea otters, we don't find them here in our Southern California waters. They're found more in Northern California and up towards Alaska. Now, something to know about the waters in Northern California and up towards Alaska is they're a lot colder than the waters here in Southern California. The ocean here is, we call it temperate water. It's in the mid-60s, maybe around 65. But in Northern California and up towards Alaska, the water gets to be in the low 50s. So these animals, they need to find a way to stay nice and warm. Now, otters are a marine mammal, and most marine mammals, like seals and sea lions and dolphins and whales, they have something called blubber. It's a really fun word. You can try saying that word, blubber. But what is blubber? Have you heard it before? Blubber is a layer of fat on these animals. So whales and dolphins and seals and sea lions, they eat a lot of food and it turns into this layer of fat inside their body that's actually extremely helpful to keep these animals warm in colder waters. Now, otters, even though they live in some of the coldest waters, they are the only marine mammal, that's a pretty cute picture, they're the only marine mammal that doesn't have blubber. So they have to find other ways to stay warm. Now, one way, you can see it really well in this picture here, is their fur. So they have the thickest fur of any mammal. If we were to look at a space this big on our otter, whoop, there we go, almost there. If you were to look at a space that big, about the size of a quarter, and you were to look under a microscope and count every individual hair, you would count almost 1,000,000 hairs just in that one space on the sea otter. And those 1,000,000 hairs, that's enough hair to cover a German Shepherd dog. So they have so much fur. Their fur is super, super thick, and that's one way they can stay warm in the colder waters. Now, the other way they stay warm is back to the food. They eat a lot. That's basically it, is they just eat a lot. They eat constantly all day, and that helps them burn their metabolism. It helps them burn energy, and it keeps them warm. So an otter is known to eat about 25% of their body weight every day. Now, if we were to eat 25% of our body weight, that would be eating a cheeseburger for every pound you weigh every day. Now, I bet some of you at home are like, how many cheeseburgers could I eat? Could I eat how many pounds I weigh? That's a lot of cheeseburgers. That's not like 3 or 4 cheeseburgers. That's like 60, 70, 80, 100 cheeseburgers every day. It might sound fun. Maybe one day it would be fun to do, but I bet you get pretty sick after. But these animals are going to be eating that equivalent amount of food every day. Now, let's take a look at some other animals that we find in the kelp forest that might not feed on sea urchins specifically, but there are tons of other animals that live amongst where the sea urchins live. There are snails, and then there's fish, and there's other animals who are feeding on those things as part of the food web. So we're going to take a look at some other marine mammals. Maybe we'll take a look at some sea lions. So here is another marine mammal. So the sea otters, they have that really thick fur. They feed on sea urchins. These are another marine mammal. These are sea lions, and we do find these animals here along our coast. What do you think they're going to feed on? Well, you know what? I have some jaws here. I'm going to bring over, I have a sea otter jaw. Now, this is a replica, so this one isn't real, but this is exactly what the skull and the jaw of a sea otter would look like. And then I have one from a sea lion. It's a lot bigger. They're a lot larger. Oh, these are a sea here. This is Parker, and I'm going to guess his buddy Harpo. So if we were to look in their mouth, there's something really interesting if we look and compare their jaws. And I'm going to go over to my document camera so we can take a better look. Because there's something really interesting about the teeth on both our otters and our sea lions. So here is the bottom jaw of our sea lion. And then I'm going to open up the mouth of our sea otter. See if you can see that. Oh, there we go. So there's something to notice about the shape of their teeth. So our sea lions, they're not eating things like sea urchins or snails or clams so much like the otters are. Instead, they're going to be feeding on things like fish. And something to notice are the shape of the sea lion's teeth. So let's take a look at these teeth first. What do you notice? What shape do you see all of their teeth are? If I had to describe it, I'd say they're kind of maybe a little bit triangular or pointy, but all of their teeth are the same shape. They're all uniform except for these 2 front ones. But what that tells us, the shape of their teeth, they're all pointy, they're all that triangular shape, is that these animals don't have any flat teeth like our otter does. If we look at the otter's mouth on the inside, let me see if I can turn the light down a little bit. Oh, I just turned it off. There we go. That's getting better. Yeah, it's so much better. So if you see these teeth at the back, they're flat. And that is something that we don't find in the sea lion's teeth. And what that tells us is that the otter is going to be chewing its food. I want you to use your tongue and feel at your back teeth. Do they feel pointy or flat? They should feel pretty flat. And that's because we use our front teeth to bite our food, and then we chew with our back teeth. And that's the same way that otters eat. They'll break open that urchin, they'll bite into it, and then they'll chew their food. But different, our sea lion doesn't chew its food. Instead, when they're going to eat fish or squid, they're going to use their teeth and grab a hold of it, and then they basically swallow it whole. So they're not really chewing their food, and we can tell that just by looking at the jaws of these animals. All right, let's take a look back at our blue cavern. We're going to get a moment and look back at our blue cavern exhibit. We're going to say goodbye to Parker and Harpo. So we're back to our blue cavern, and this is that whole habitat that we were looking at to explore that food web. So we want to review. We talked about how the sun provides energy for these kelp, and then the kelp is a food source for other animals like sea urchins. There's also abalone, is another kind of snail that likes to eat kelp. There's also some snails and slugs, like a sea hare eats lettuces and algae and kelp. And so all these smaller animals are going to be eating kelp, and that's how they're getting their energy. And then the sea urchins, the snails, the slugs, they are food for other animals. They provide energy to fish, to sea stars might eat some of them, to birds, to squid, to octopus, to people. And then all those things I just named, they provide energy or food to larger animals. So sea lions are going to be eating fish, larger fish eat other fish, birds might be eating the squid, humans eat all those things. And then we get to the end of our food web or food chain in what we call an apex predator. So if we look at a massive food chain or food web, and we look at the animal at the very top that doesn't have any predators, that's what we call an apex predator. Now, an apex predator that we find in our local waters, or more Northern California, but they sometimes visit our water, is a really cool shark species. So we're going to bring up a picture of a great white shark. What a beautiful picture. Now, not all sharks are apex predators. There are some sharks that find themselves in other areas of that food chain or that food web, or they might be at the end, but they're not quite considered an apex predator. But our great white shark is considered an apex predator because it's at the very top of the food chain. And so they're going to be eating everything else that they find all the way down. So they're going to be eating fish or seals and sea lions, which ate other fish, which ate other fish, which ate those snails, and all the way down, creating our food web. Now, great white sharks are a really cool animal. They're beautiful, majestic sharks, and they get about 23 feet long. I think 23 is about the largest on record. Generally, they're more in the 20-foot range. Now, you can see right here the different parts of the shark. We've got the gills right here, and that's how they breathe. We've got the eyes and the teeth. That makes them really good hunters. And the body shape makes them really good swimmers, including their fins, their pectoral fins, and their dorsal fin over here makes them really good at swimming. Now, like I said, we do have great white sharks here along our coast. Oftentimes when we see great white sharks here in Southern California, we're going to find the females. Now, why do you think we just find females down here? If you thought that's because they're going to give birth down here, you're right. So we don't find too many great white sharks here because of what they eat. So think about it. An animal is going to live in its habitat where there's a lot of food for it to eat. And great white sharks, they feed on seals and sea lions. Now, we can go to our beach or on a boat around our area here in Southern California and maybe see a handful of seals or sea lions, but we don't see an abundance. We don't see tons of them. And so these big animals are going to live in an area where there's a ton of their food. So most great whites that we find in California are going to live in Northern California. There's an area called the Farallon Islands, which is off the coast of San Francisco, and they have a big population of great whites there. But what the females, they're going to head to Southern California, where our waters are a little bit warmer, maybe a little bit calmer for them. They're going to give birth to their young. Now, baby great whites are about 6 to 7 feet, which sounds like a big shark, but comparative to a 20-foot animal, that's pretty small. So the juveniles are going to stay down here in Southern California, and because they're small, they are not ready to be eating things like seals and sea lions. So they're going to be eating fish and squid. And the females are going to travel back up to Northern California, leaving their young down here to eat, to grow, and once they're large enough that they have a bigger appetite and they're ready to eat bigger foods, then they're going to travel back up north to Northern California to feed on seals and sea lions and be part of that food web up there. So food webs are kind of a complicated things. They're always changing, and the energy goes in different directions depending on what the animal is going to eat. And that animal might change their preference if they find a different food they like to eat, or if that food source runs out, if there is fishing happening in that area and we overfish one animal, an animal in the ocean might need to find something else to eat. So food webs can be really complicated, but it's really interesting to take a look at a habitat and see how all the animals are connected, because that is a big way that animals are connected in a singular habitat. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We are about out of time. I hope you enjoyed learning about food webs, and if you joined us for any other program today, I hope you enjoyed learning with us. We have another full day of programming tomorrow. We hope you enjoy and have a good rest of your afternoon.